Dr. Tatum, it is such an honor to meet you. Thank you so much for talking with us this evening. My name is Kyndall Carpenter, and I am a freshman from Marin Catholic High School located in Kentfield, California.
My name's Chase. I'm 9 years old in fourth grade, and I go to the Cab Elementary School of the Arts.
My name is Emelie Jamison. I'm 19 years old. I'm a former youth in foster care. I work with Georgia Empowerment as a youth advocate. I believe in nothing about us without us. I'm currently working on finishing my GED, and I'm working part-time.
Dr. Tatum, could you tell us a little bit about your background and why the work of Georgia Appleseed, like dismantling the school-to-prison pipeline and equitable supports for children and youth, is so important to you?
Sure. Well, let me begin by just saying to Kyndall and Chase and Emelie, I'm delighted to be in conversation with all of you and looking forward to this time together. So I am a psychologist. I grew up in Massachusetts. I live now in Atlanta, Georgia, but I spent most of my childhood and my adult years actually in Massachusetts. And once I became a psychologist, I was very interested in the experiences of people of color generally, but African Americans in particular, as it relates to racism and how racism operates in our society, and the ways in which young people come to understand their own racial identity in the context of a race-conscious society. So I've taught a lot about that. I taught a course for many years on the psychology of racism. I have written books about it. And certainly when we think about the school to prison pipeline, we know that the way it functions, particularly in the lives of Black and Brown youth, has everything to do with the way racism operates in our society. So for me, as a social justice educator, that's how I like to think of myself. As a social justice educator, I think it's important to look at all the different ways we can interrupt the cycle of racism, including the kinds of ways that Georgia Appleseed is focused on. And I'm happy to be here tonight.
As a youth, my education was affected due to race and how I identified, which leads us to the question, why is it important for adults and people in power to listen to the youth's experience within education and the criminal justice system?
Well, as you said at the very beginning, Emelie, nothing about us without us, right? It's very important for people to have the voices of folks who are being impacted by whatever it is, right? So if we're talking about the education system, the experience of education, we want to know, of course, what students are experiencing, how they feel about what's happening to them. And, we also want to hear from teachers and family members, parents, et cetera. But the feedback that students can give is critical. And when we think about the way, as the earlier question asked about the school to prison pipeline, one of the things we know that happens in schools that impacts that is the way discipline systems are used, right? And so when we look at why young people get in trouble at school, whether that's, being sent to the principal's office or, suspension or who knows what else. But if we think about how those decisions are made, it's very clear, statistics tell us that the same behaviors when used by a white child may or may not get that kid in trouble. But the same kind of response on the part of a child of color often leads to descriptions of having, bad attitudes or, very subjective assessments of that behavior that we know is influenced by that, or can be certainly influenced by bias of a variety of kinds. So we need to pay attention to that. And we ask educators to look carefully at the disparate impact that subjective assessments of student performance. The kid who's restless because he's bored, when that child is Black, isn't seen as a talented kid who is restless because he's bored. He might be seen as a kid who has, behavioral problems that need to be addressed. And that's a very different understanding, right? You would respond differently to a child who needs more challenge than to a child who you think is being intentionally obstructed in some way. Or maybe is dealing with, speaking as a psychologist, we know sometimes the trauma of difficult situations at home can impact student performance, student behavior, and the response then is not necessarily more discipline. It may be a need for more understanding, more counseling, more awareness of the struggle that the child's having. So these are the kinds of issues that students can give feedback about when we listen.
Dr. Tatum, do you believe that adults should be a part of the development of a youth's identity? And if so, how involved should they be in that process?
Well, I believe adults not only should be, but they are, whether they are trying to be or not, right? Because if we think about identity and how it develops, it has everything to do with the feedback we get from the people around us. Some of those people might be people our own age, other kids, but it might be, and often is, parents, adults, teachers in the environment. So what do I mean by that? I mean, if I asked each of you to describe yourself, if I asked you to fill in a blank, I am fill in the blank, you might say, I am 10. I think that's what Chase told me, or maybe he's, Chase, are you 9? Did you tell me you were 9? You might say, I am 9. Of course, that's it. Got it. That's an age. You might say, you know, I'm tall. You might say, I'm smart. You might say, I'm beautiful. You might say, I'm African-American. You might say, I speak 2 languages. I'm bilingual. What a person says about themselves doesn't just come from their own ideas. It comes from the feedback that they've gotten from other people. If you tell me you're smart, I'm going to tell you somebody's told you that, right? That it's that feedback that you've gotten that leads you to think that. So when you ask Kyndall, should adults be involved in the identity development of kids, young people? Absolutely. The answer is they should be, and they are, sometimes in negative ways. We want them to be involved in positive ways. We want them to be giving that feedback that is affirming and empowering and providing role models and examples, so that that self-definition that everyone is developing in relationship to other people, you know, all of us, that's universal as we grow up. As we are developing that self-definition, we want that self-definition to be one that is life-giving, you know, one that helps you achieve your goals, one that allows you to see what's possible for you, not a limiting self-definition. So yeah, we need adults to help with that for sure.
How can adults and youth come together to create a vision for the future?
Well, I think creating a vision for the future together is a really powerful thing. You know, if we think about the intergenerational learning, right? You know, if I have some knowledge from my experience, I want to be able to share that. But I also know that there are things that young people understand and know about that I may not be tuned into because of my own generational blinders, you know. So I am the parent of 2 sons, and I often ask my sons to help me with things related to technology, as an example, right? They have knowledge and understanding about the digital age because they grew up with it that I don't necessarily have. I think I'm pretty good with technology, but they are better. So the fact is that we need their knowledge, but they also need my knowledge. And so when we come together, we can create a vision for the future that works not just for me, but will work for them and will work for you in terms of, because you're even younger than they are, right? So that multi-generational sharing of knowledge is really important. There's a name for that. And the name that I'm going to give it in this conversation is mutual mentoring. You know, we often talk about adults mentoring kids, but young people can mentor adults by sharing the knowledge that they have, the experiences that they have in ways that help somebody who is an older person from a different generation have new insights, new awareness.
When we talk about race in schools, how should we make the conversation broader than just talking about Black and white to bring awareness to challenges faced by other minority communities?
When we talk about race in schools, I think one of the most important things we could do would be to deepen our understanding of history. Because if we knew our history, and by history, I'm talking right now about US history, right? If more people had a better understanding of US history, they would know that racism is not just a Black-white issue. We would certainly know about the treatment of the indigenous peoples who were here when the colonists from Europe arrived, but we would also know about the contributions of not just African Americans, but Asian Americans. We would know about the history of and the legacy of Chinese Americans in building the railroads. We would know about the experiences of Japanese Americans on the West Coast during World War II. We would know about the engagement and interaction with our fellow Americans on the southern border. We talk about America as though it's just the United States, but America is a continent that includes Mexico. It includes Canada, right? So we would know much more about that history and the cooperation that has existed among peoples of color throughout this period of what we know as the United States and its history. If we knew that, that conversation itself would be broader.
Why are systematic changes to education in the juvenile system necessary? What do these changes look like?
Well, we know they're necessary because it's not working now, right? We understand that the disproportionate impact of the juvenile justice system on Black and brown youth is really problematic. We know that there is what is sometimes referred to by psychologists as the adultification of young people, meaning that children of color are sometimes not even perceived as children. They are sometimes treated as adults. You know, we see horrible examples of things like, you know, a Black girl at the age of 6 being handcuffed and taken to the police station because she was having a tantrum at school. That kind of treatment is very unlikely to be experienced by white youth, but we know that those kinds of examples can be pointed to not just once or twice, but repeatedly as it relates to the treatment of Black and brown youth in our criminal justice system and the criminalization of behaviors at school that really are more about counseling needs, perhaps, than criminal needs, speak to the kind of distortion that comes when our system remains unchanged. So in an ideal world, I think we would be talking about meeting the needs of children as we see them as needs, not behaviors that need to be criminalized. You know, if a kid is having a bad day in school, why is that? What's going on at home? What kind of counseling do they need? If a child is in a dangerous situation at home, whether it's because of lack of housing or something else is going on, how do we respond to those needs without blaming the victim, so to speak? So I think it is really important for us to think about how do we meet the needs of young people so that they can thrive in school and outside of school. And when we do that, I think we will be interrupting that pipeline that we started our conversation talking about.
Thank you for taking the time out of your day to talk to us.
Well, it's been my honor, and thank you for spending this time in conversation with me.